Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. On my way to the couch, I think I'll give you guys a bit of a roundup about the live stream that I did last week. Some of you guys came to watch, which was really great, but I also have to be honest, a live stream is really intense and it's very difficult to combine live streaming with a full-time job and trying to get a video going every day. So as a result, I'm thinking about how I can incorporate live streaming into the channel, and at the moment it's looking like I'm going to try and do this maybe every couple of weeks, maybe even every month or so. But my goal will be to first gather certain topics that I can then talk about during the live stream and that you guys can ask questions on. And I think if I would live stream several times a week, I just would run out of stuff to talk about. And I think you maybe could have noticed that at the end of the live stream as well, it was becoming more difficult to stay engaged from my part, but also from the viewers. Fewer comments came in, so I think I'll shoot for probably like around a 1 hour live stream every couple of weeks, possibly once a month, depending on how often and how much news comes out around EVE Online, and then just make it more about what's happening in EVE, giving you guys a bit of the opportunity to ask me questions and things like that as well, and just get the interaction going rather than doing hour-long live streams where I'm just exploring or just mining or something like that. I personally don't think that that would be entertaining, and that's not exactly what I'm looking to do for the channel either, but I think that live streaming is really cool, has a lot of potential, and I do want to find basically the right way for me to incorporate it into the channel. So that experiment is going to keep going. I'm not exactly sure when the next live stream is going to be. Once I get into a bit more of a regular schedule, or I know exactly what I'm doing with all of that, I think I'll start announcing it. But for now, it's still in the experimentation phase, but I'm planning to basically find the right schedule for myself. Another thing that I quickly want to mention, of course, it is the Alliance tournament. So if you want to check that out, make sure to check out CCP stream. And another thing is that next week the August release comes out, and apparently there's a new event that's only going to last 1 week, which at this point I don't know anything about. So keep that in mind as well. A new event starting with the August release that will only last 1 week, might be pretty intense. We'll see what it's all about, I think, when it comes out, unless I find time this weekend to check it out on CC. I'm just not sure that CCP is deploying it there. It looks more like they want it to be a bit more of a surprise. Anyways, after that pretty long intro, we are here for the market, of course, and as always we're going to start with plex. That's going to be at 3 minutes. 300, there we go. And you can maybe also have seen it in the ticker. Plex has basically not moved, but I should take out the ticker here. At least in JITA it hasn't moved. In JITA it's at around 3,235,000 ISK for one plex. In the player-owned trade hubs, especially in perimeter, apparently it's going for 3,160,000 ISK, and the buyers are up to 3,120,000. In JITA 3,115. So a bit of a sideways movement here. We can clearly see that after the pullback we went up to 3.5 million, which was very expensive, and one of my viewers apparently then bought some plex from CCP. It turned that straight into ISK and is very happy about that. It's of course at the right time. Now we're hovering a little bit above 3 million, and you can clearly see here now that at the moment in the last couple of days we've been above and below the 5-day moving average on the median daily prices. So a bit of hesitation, a bit of price finding for plex apparently at the current range, which, well, it gives us a little bit of time to breathe and to see exactly, or to try and plan for what's happening next. And that is difficult to say beforehand. I still think that towards the winter expansion plex normally go back up, so I do think that we'll still see maybe a push, and at least towards the winter expansion we'll probably see a bit of a speculative bubble show up. That's what usually happens, and so that's probably when I'll look to sell some of my plex. That would be on another one of these very sharp rises like these two here, but closer to the winter expansion. So I think that we may either go flat here or slightly up towards the winter expansion as people prepare for what's probably coming, and after that on the hype we might see another jump up, maybe towards 4 million. I wouldn't rule it out personally. That's when I'll be looking to sell myself. Let's move on to the skill extractors. Of course, a very similar chart, and here you can clearly see from the 5-day moving average that we're basically flat for about a week or so. Median daily prices still trying to go up a little bit and then back down at the moment. So skill extractors are being sold for 358 million ISK, a little bit less than last week, I think. And the bars are at 353, so very narrow margin between these two, or 352 actually for those that are in range. So a very narrow margin here on the skill extractors. This is after a week of basically price finding, a bit of consolidation in the plex market, and of course as a result also in the skill extractor market. That means that, we'll quickly touch on the multiple pilot train certificate. That one is dropping off quite quickly again, being sold for 1,240 million ISK. That is not so bad if you want like an extra character to do some training on your account. This is definitely, I would say, more affordable than trying to do it with 500 plex. It is a smaller market, and so any serious demand is going to push that price back up. But this is another pretty sharp drop in the price here, and basically back down to 1.2 billion, a little bit above that for 1 month trading time. But it is for a second character on an account, of course. That's already subbed. And the bars 1160, again, decently narrow margin here all of a sudden. That's of course normal when the price decreases like that. But an interesting one should be the skill injectors, seeing what those are doing. So at the moment, very close mirror to plex, but we can also see that it's been delayed a little bit. It's a little bit later that the first signs show up, basically that these are starting to move sideways at this point. And what is always interesting, of course, is that the difference between plex and skill injectors would indicate the current demand in the game for fresh skill points, and that can either be tied to new players coming into the game, but it can also be tied to veteran players and alliances bouncing to different metas depending on changes in the game, possibly different activities that they're doing. By this time you should probably know that Goon, Swarm or the Imperium is engaging in a war with Pandemic Legion, North Coalition. So this is a very interesting war with really the biggest players in the game going up against each other. And this may be the push that some of the members need to, for instance, buy some skill injectors to get into a carrier or to switch from one focus to another. Things like that can happen. And here basically we are not really seeing any big discrepancies between plex and the skill injectors. We have the same pullback after a sharp rise up above 800 million ISK, and here now at around 750 I think we're basically settling down here. But it is a little bit delayed, which is quite interesting in the sense that if plex move very quickly and you are very quick as well, you may just have a quick chance to anticipate what the large skill injectors are going to do, and as a result get that edge on the investment. I still personally do think that if you're looking for that investment as a store of value, I would look at large skill injectors, especially now that they have fallen back a little bit to 750, which has been the baseline for several months by now. I mean, it remains a pretty big gamble. If plex would drop off, then of course large skill injectors are going to drop off as well, but it has that extra element of the possible demand for skill points added into it, which I think make it a very interesting item, because it has this potential, because of that, I think, for more volatility, more trade potential, but also that very strong protection against inflation, because of course of the large skill extractor that's included in there. So very interesting, and the large skill injectors are currently being sold for 759 million ISK, and the buyers are at 744 million ISK. Again, we can see that the margin between the buyers and the sellers has closed substantially on this downtrend. And then the small skill injectors, that is still not a very good chart, but here we can again see that they are actually still going down despite the fact that plex are hesitating at this price point. But it's a little bit difficult, I think, at the moment to say that the small skill injectors are as mature and as strongly correlated as the large skill injector market is to plex, because of course it's so much newer. Still, these are being sold for 152 million ISK almost, and the buyers are at 145. Again, really narrow margin between these two. In fact, even more narrow, I think, than the large skill injector. And so these small skill injectors, they may just have had a little bit more momentum because they're so new, because there's fewer of them, may have been pushed back down a bit more quickly than they should. So these might actually jump up a little bit if large skill injectors, as I would expect, start to move sideways. So that's it for the plex related stuff. Let's move on to some minerals. That's going to be at 10:30. Okay, and this I like. Titanium up again. So that is very nice. On the chart, 6 ISK is slowly coming into view here, which is before ascension. That would be incredible to see titanium back here. 560. Oh, let's actually take this filter out. 588 for the sellers. And are there sellers like in range? Yeah, a couple here. 565 in New Caldari, but that's also in Yeti Create. No, that's indeed in a player-owned trade hub, but these will probably just get snagged up pretty quickly. They're also much smaller in volume. There is a big one here, 1.6 billion in perimeter being sold at 584. That's a bit more in line, but in JITA it's 588, coming very close on the sellers towards the 6 ISK mark for titanium, which historically is a little bit above average, but considering the context that we are in here with the really serious downturn we've known with Ascension, then this is probably a really a good price. If it comes above 6 ISK, you might want to consider selling. Of course, a major factor here is going to be the war. Lots of ships are already being blown up, although I think it's mostly sub-capitals at this point, some Typhoon fleets and things like that. And as a small order of 5 million comes in at 587, you can see that there is some competition to try and sell off some of the titanium, right? 2 billion, 3 orders of those at 590. People are trying, of course, because they are probably still sitting on stocks as well, which they bought very cheaply. It's not going to be an easy push towards 6 ISK, but at least it's happening, right? On the chart, we are going up at the moment, thanks to the war. Buyers up to 571 as well, so they have been forced up quite substantially too. If you want that titanium, you need to be a bit more of a price here, a bit more of a war premium at the moment, which is great, of course, for the high-sec miners here. They're getting more out of their Veldspar. Their ISK per hour should be going up at this point. The real question, of course, is we've seen this increase in titanium that's been going on for almost half a year now, so that's been pretty good. But what has lagged behind is pyrite and isogen. Those two have basically still been flat at their year low prices. So let's take a look at pyrite, see what's happening here. A little bit of a jump up, but it's still very, very timid. And of course, we would like to see this go up 6-7 ISK. We would need this in order to keep the rationale that titanium is much more common than pyrite. So titanium 580. 588, almost 5.9 ISK for the sellers. And what is pyrite doing? 597 for the sellers and 570 for the buyers. So the buyers are in fact trying to buy pyrite at a cheaper price than they're trying to buy titanium, which is an unnatural situation considering the sources where they come from. But we can also see a little bit of a jump up, hopefully under pressure from titanium. This will actually start to go up as well. Here pyrite should break 6 ISK on a little bit more demand, so that should be possible. I think the biggest problem is, of course, that there are still massive stocks of the stuff out there, and you need less of it than titanium, so it has a much harder time increasing its price, especially back to pre-essential levels. We would need to see 9 ISK for that, which is definitely not in the cards anytime soon. So good news for titanium. A bit of a jump up for pyrite. The question is, will this be sustainable? Will this continue to increase in price? And of course, that's difficult to say beforehand. Next up, we've got Mexilon. Very nice jump up, of course, for the high-sec mineral. That is a bottleneck in nullsec, so that's always been a little bit tricky for them to get enough Mexilon from their local mining. As a result, there is strong demand, and we jump back up towards 80 ISK, 79.5 for the sellers, 75.3 for the buyers. Not bad at all. If you have some Mexilon stocks, this is a pretty sharp increase in price. you know, again, you could look into selling. You could also keep a close eye on the war. And as long as that one keeps raging, as long as you're seeing a lot of destruction being posted on Reddit, that is a very good sign for our demand, of course. So that is basically the thing that you need to weigh. Do you have the patience, and are you willing to risk a little bit of a longer period, but you keep an eye on the war, so try to wait out for a better sell opportunity? Or do you take the chance right now to dump your Mexilon for almost 80 ISK and your Tritanium for almost 6 ISK, when you could of course have bought it for like 4.5 right here at the very bottom? That is what you need to decide on as a miner and an investor, of course, which I can't do for you. Personally, I'm gonna keep an eye on the war, and I'm definitely gonna not going to unload everything. Maybe some small sales might be in order, but definitely nothing too serious just yet. Especially because I still think that there might be more conflict coming with the winter expansion as well, when CCP is gonna turn outposts into faction citadels. I think at least some groups, especially the Imperium, I can definitely see them deciding to go for a sort of a scorched earth policy, where they have all of those ships available. They're much bigger than anyone else. They have all the means. They could really burn everything down region per region, which may create some very nice conflicts, and may basically reset the nullsec game a little bit in a sense. So very, very interesting in my opinion. Isogen, same pattern of course, doing badly historically speaking, staying at that 50 ISK price range, which is not really good. We can see here in early June that it tried to break out at some point, but stocks were just too plentiful, and that got squashed down by massive volumes very quickly. So people saw one opportunity to sell close to 60 ISK, and they said, all right, I'm gonna dump my Isogen. That is of course the danger, but here maybe because of Tritanium and Mexilon, we may have a slightly more sustained increase in price. So Isogen is currently being sold for 55 ISK, and the buyers are at 54 ISK, up a little bit from last week at least, and hopefully this has some momentum. It's the first sign of some good news for high-sec miners here. Noxium finally also jumping off, but you can clearly see that that one has had a rough time as well in the last couple of months or so, dropping back off towards the 300 ISK mark at 320, bottoming out here, and currently being sold for 370 ISK, and the buyers are up to 342 ISK. So good week for high-sec minerals in general. It's just unfortunate that Pyrite and Isogen are lagging behind so much towards compared to their pre-ascension price, whereas Tritanium is doing really well compared to that. So it's a little bit weird to see all that disparity, and of course Mexilon is the big winner here, actually probably the biggest percentage jump in any of the high-sec minerals. So moving on to the nullsec ones. Here is Zydrine, still staying decently flat, but on the final day up a little bit, so from 1000 to like 1050. Sellers are at 1100, almost 1094, and the buyers are still at 1000 ISK for Zydrine, so still very doable, pretty flat, nothing too drastic to report. You may have seen on the ticker though that it's a little bit different in Megasite. That one has clearly shot up here, all of a sudden median daily prices well above the averages, and so Megasite now being sold for 1350 ISK, and the buyers are at 1270 ISK, so that went up like a good 10% in a matter of a week. Definitely not bad. And another sign that maybe what's happening as well is that less ore is being mined in nullsec at the moment. The first well, no, actually that doesn't make too much sense why it would not be Zydrine going up, but it would be Megasite, because you would focus on the most expensive mineral still, so you would think that it's the other ones that would go up first, the other sources that represent less ISK per hour that would go up first. Maybe there's just more Zydrine still lying around. That's definitely a possibility. But Megasite, the first sign that maybe the Imperium going to war now has also left their local miners a bit more vulnerable. Lots of rorquals being blown up, and as a result, lower yields across the board in the game in general may mean higher prices as well, together with more demand, of course, to replace their losses. Yeah, pretty decent time. Or pretty good week here so far for us miners. And then finally we also have to touch on Morphite as well, which is up slightly, but that is still this slow evolution in the 9,000 to 10,000 ISK band, so we would hope for a better opportunity. 9,600, that's not so bad, you know, compared to what it's been in the last few months, but we would of course like to see more fight shoot up well above 10,000 ISK before we sell our stocks. Buyers are up to 9,170 ISK, so they are definitely up above the 8,000 something mark, which makes the investment a little bit more tricky to justify at this point, considering everything that's been happening. But hopefully at some point Tech2 ships get involved quite heavily in the war, and I will see a nice jump up like this. That would be a great sell opportunity, of course. So yeah, let's hope all of this has some momentum. Moving on to some PI next at 2030. There we go. Construction blocks shooting up, alright, out of the blue. So it looks like the summer investment opportunities may be over here, if this is a first sign of what's to come. Shooting up to 13,000 ISK on the chart, 13,900 for the sellers, well above average, 12,600 for the buyers, probably a little bit above average as well. So our buy opportunity, it may have been the end of July. This is the first one that clearly shows that demand exists in the market, and that it's going to be tricky to actually find a bottom that is well below average here so far. Consumer electronics next also wants to go up a little bit more at the tail end. So here again, the settling of the chart is at like 13,600 ISK, which is above average if you look at the entire chart, but that just maybe have been the bottom already. 14,700 for the sellers, 13,700 for the buyers. It's definitely not a bad time to have some PI planets up and running then. Coolants next, so those shot up a little bit a couple of weeks ago and are now hovering above the 12,000 ISK mark. The buyers, the sellers are at 12,900, which I would put at a little bit above average, and the buyers are at 12,100. So sellers 12,900, probably a little bit above average. 12,500 is probably the average there, and then 12,100 is probably the average. So coolants up a little bit and now basically sideways at this slightly better price than average. So here again, July probably your bottom at 11,000 ISK. Enriched uranium next. Ooh, that one is dropping off quite sharply. Large volume, so someone must have done some dumping on that opportunity at 7,500. I personally wouldn't blame you. Try and get that selling, but this does maybe create a slight buy opportunity. Sellers are at 14,700 and the buyers are at 13,800, which on the chart, let's take a look at that, is right here. So on the buyer side of things, if you consider what's been happening here since after May to be a pattern, then enriched uranium is actually in a pretty good spot to try and pick some of that up, because if it does the same as all the others, then we'll probably jump up from here. Next up, we've got the integrity response drones. At least that one is pulling back a little bit, so I was a little bit afraid on that push up here to 2.8 million that we would not see another buy opportunity, but we're back down, sometimes even below 2.5 million. 2.6 million for the sellers, 2.55 million for the buyers. So not bad if you look at the entire chart, right? Just above 2.5 million for the buyers. So if you need them, yeah, definitely take a look at the integrity response drones. And considering the patterns that I'm seeing here in PI in general, this may actually be a buy opportunity in general, even if you want to invest in those and gamble on more interest for the winter expansion in integrity response drones, because of course of the production of the new refineries. So very good to see at least this one play with the 2.5 million mark again, giving us an opportunity to put up some buyers at maybe 2.6 million, something like that. Don't go too big in the volumes again, but you may be able to pick some of these up close to 2.5 million, which is probably really good if you plan to use them, and maybe a good investment as well if you have the patience to wait for the winter expansion. Next up, we've got mechanical parts, very similar pattern here again. End of June, a bit of a bottom, and here 12,500 ISK for mechanical parts. So easy to create, probably above average. You know, I would put the, yeah, I would dare to put 12,000 or even a little bit below that as the average. I would have gambled on this being the average price right here, or maybe just a touch below at the very end. But here, currently being sold for 13,300 ISK, definitely above average. 12,100 for the buyers, probably a touch above average. And so mechanical parts, again, that same pattern, bottom in June and managing to go up and stay up here at a slightly above average price. Historically speaking, this may be the new normal for PI at the moment. Nuclear reactors next, also back up very nicely. So this was definitely a slight buy opportunity at 80,000 ISK. Are we back above 100,000 ISK? Yeah, 120 for the sellers, 115 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, very strong demand. That is pretty obvious. And yet another sell opportunity in the nuclear reactors, where again you do see that pattern, a pullback at the end of June, early July. That was in fact a nice buy opportunity, and now we're already back up and probably going to stay in this above average region, unless of course in August we do actually see another pullback. But maybe with the Alliance tournament and with the events that CCP is holding, even if they're not great, right, even if they lack some stuff, they may just push enough interest in the game to have people prepare themselves and get active in the PI market, which may of course mean that these above average prices are here to stay. Oxygen next, that one is finally dropping off a little bit, but went to well above 500 ISK on the median daily price, so that's no surprise. Back down to 450, 502 for the sellers, well above average, 388 for the buyers. That's definitely quite a big margin here. This is something to keep in mind. If those buyers don't move for 388, then any fresh supply, which for oxygen is not that difficult to produce, can actually tank the price very quickly here. So be careful. If you're still trying to sell, then I would say do so right now, but don't do it with everything, so that you don't spook the market into a complete crash, because the potential here, 388 for the buyers, is very low. That's a very wide margin. Any fresh supply can really crash that price very quickly here. Robotics next, also taking off, very interesting here. Again, it's not the June, July, but it's a little bit later that we see a bottom, but we do see another push back up, where 100,000 ISK would have been a little bit above average for robotics, but that seems to be the summer bottom here. And we're taking off 114,000 ISK for the sellers, 106,000 ISK for the buyers. So again, definitely up in the last few weeks, and that may have been our bottom time here. June, July, something like that. August seemed to be up in general. Rocket fuel next. This was actually probably a called buy opportunity, right? Well below average, below the entire chart here for a little bit, but the same pattern happening again. We're back up to 12,500 ISK, which is the average for rocket fuels. Rocket fuels is a little bit weird. It has those median daily prices all over the place, but it's still showing that same pattern once again. So 12,400 for the sellers, probably average. 11,100 for the buyers, probably still a little bit below average, but we can see the same pattern forming here as well. If this has some more momentum over the next week and we find ourselves in the 12.5 to 13.5 ISK price range, then we're back above average, and we'll have seen the pattern yet another time. Now, self-harmonizing power cores, unfortunately not as sharp a drop-off or as good a drop-off as with the integrity response drones. So I would hope for 2 million as a buy opportunity. It may not happen anymore, that's unfortunate. So let's call this one pullback here some good news. Self-harmonizing power cores being sold for 2.375, so almost 2.4 million, and the buyers are a bit above 2.2 million. So hopefully we can still push that down before the winter expansion, so that we have an opportunity. But again, here July bottom, it may be over, unfortunately. Superconductors next, slightly up in price. If we make the chart like this, yeah, again June bottom, back up in price here, and 13,950 ISK for the sellers. That's well above average. 12,900 for the buyers. That's also above average, I would say, for superconductors. So demand is back in the PI market across the board. Not as violent a swing as I would have thought. Basically, a lot of them are slow burning since June, July towards above average prices. I would have hoped for a bigger dip later in the summer. That doesn't seem to be materializing, and so at this point, again, we are in decent sell order territory. Not the best yet, right? We've definitely been better on most of these, but the general trend is that apparently the summer dip is over. So keep a close eye on it. Still, you don't know what August, September is going to bring, but UCCP can keep the hype going with all of these with all of these events, and then of course probably with news of what's to come in the game towards the winter expansion, then I fully personally expect that unfortunately our buy opportunity for PI may already be over, and I never really took the gamble because very few of them went to lower than average prices. Test cultures next. That one is trying but not really doing very much here at the moment, which is one of my investments. I do have stocks of test cultures, so hopefully at some point we'll see some volatility. 8,800 is for the sellers and 7,500 for the buyers, so you're still buying test cultures for a pretty damn cheap price here. And finally we've got wetware mainframes that, well, it's hesitating, but it's not going to touch the 2.1 million or the 2 million mark anymore, I don't think. Currently being sold for 2.25 million, the buyers are at 2.2 million. You can see that very narrow margin does that strong demand even at 2.2 million, which means that if you need them, then you'll have to pay that price, not 2 million, which 10%, I mean, it's definitely a pretty markup. A pretty decent markup compared to what I would have liked to see the wetware mainframes buy orders at, but not much we can do about it. Next up after PI we have Take One chips at 31 minutes. We'll quickly go over these. Here is the Abaddon. So we saw, I think last week already, that it was working on another jump up to 200 million, currently being sold for 193 and the buyers are at 176. So this one is probably already on its way back down in price because of any fresh supply that's coming in. I think this is CVA preparation. I still think that's the story in the Abaddon market. The Caracal could be interesting, right? You've got a war, you've got Test and Horde involved. You would think that their alpha clones may be ready for Caracals and may be flown quite often. You do see a bit of a volume spike, but you're not seeing any response in the price. Caracals being sold for 10 million, so the volume spike is probably I bought everything below 10 million, and then 8.8 million for the buyers, still very, very cheap. So yeah, I think this volume spike may have just happened, and as a result may have been just a purchase of a fleet, which will put the price closer to 10 million, but we're probably not gonna break it. So that is interesting that we can have these big buys, but they're hardly making the price move on a cruiser. The Coveter next here, slight jump up, already back down in price, so probably just a lack of activity here throughout July meant that at some point we were running out of Coveters, nobody was bringing those to the market, jump up in price, but then I suspect that we'll see some in the last 24 hours. Yep, exactly 77 and 10 coming in, squashing that slight increase in price in the Take One market. As I've said, very, very difficult to make a lot of money on this at the moment because of the lack of demand, and of course any opportunity then gets squashed very quickly by anyone that notices it. Next up here we've got the Ferox. That one is obviously flown actively. That is one of the war profiteering ships that we can actually take some advantage from. So went down to 47.3 million, currently being sold for 63.3 million, and the buyers went up to 54 million. This is obviously one of the Nosec alliances involved in the wars that came in, bought a lot of them and is still buying a lot of them. And so for the Ferox, I think if you can produce them, it makes a lot of sense to do so and to bring these ships to the market. So that is something, again here, a lesson that we must keep at the back of our mind, which I don't always pay enough attention to that. There's just so many hours in a day, of course, but keep an eye on doctrines that are being flown in nullsec, because when the wars do happen, of course, that's when you can make a lot of ISK on those ships. You know, we could have bought those very easily for less than 50 million, and if you would have bought in the last few months at the right times, like maybe just 5 at a time or so, you'd probably have 50 Feroxes ready for sale at like 63 million with a nice I don't know, 15-20% profit, something like that to be made here. So this is of course why I've always been calling for a war in EVE Online to bring some more life back to the market, and that's exactly what I was talking about right here in the Ferox. The Hurricane next, that one basically went up like 10 days ago or something like that, up to 60 million. And of course, that is the counterbalance to this. Tech 1 ships are pretty easily made, so do expect a lot of competition if you're trying to sell them at the moment. And that it is, I think, what we'll see in like the last week or so. You can see that they've gone from 58 million, then down to 55 million, 53 million, 52 million, 51.6 million, 51 million, 49 million. So you can see 48.7 million. So you can see that, competition is really hard to show in that Tech 1 market. Opportunities are created by the war, but don't expect you to be able to all of a sudden sell thousands of Hurricanes at massive profits. We're talking very low volumes and very quick response times by the industrialists. So expect the Ferox to drop off just as sharply as the Hurricane is doing right now. 47.5 million for the Stellars is already back in line with what it was before the spike. The Maelstrom next, that one is went up to 190 million and is now on its way down a little bit. Volumes don't really indicate any massive Maelstrom fleets being bought at the moment. 184 million for the sellers, 170 million for the buyers. It's a battleship, basically a market that is in general dead in the water, except for the Typhoon, of course, which we all know the Imperium is currently flying in the war. Megatron next, 150 million, so at pretty low price. 155 for the sellers, 142 for the buyers. This is one of those, if at some point, you know, the Imperium or a group would decide, you know what, we're maybe gonna try a Megatron fleet to switch it up a little bit. Well, the bad news is you can see that there's maybe 50 of them or so for sale in JITA in general. So if they do pull the trigger on that, then you'll see a massive spike all of a sudden, but that remains a pretty big gamble in the battleship market, just because the volumes are so low and the availability is so low as well. In a battle cruiser, that may be more possible, like in the Prophecy here. Well, we just don't have that many of those though. Up to 59 million ISK, which is just at the upper edge here. So this again, I think, is a CVA ship that maybe have something to do with the volatility we've seen in the last few months. So you could presumably bring some Prophecies at a profit here on the market. And here we've got the Scorpion. That one is up in price a little bit, quite interesting. Went pretty low though, 140 million for a battleship is very low. So I think that basically is it the purchase. Yeah, like over a couple of days we've got some purchases happening. It just takes like around 40 of them, as I was saying with the Megatron as well. Doesn't take that many of them to create a spike here, and currently they're being sold for 168 million. Buyers are at 140 million. So the Scorpion, some buying happening, but you don't need that much to bring that price up. And unfortunately, we'll see competition come in very quickly and drop the price in big chunks, I think. And finally, we've got the Vexor, nice and flat, just above 10 million, is currently being sold for 10 million. And the buyers are at 9.4 million for a Vexor. Really not much to say here, except that it has slightly better volumes. As a result, it's just way more stable as well. So the Tech 1 market still very tricky. I'll quickly add the Typhoon right here, because I'm just going to take a look at the Concorde ships for the extra product, but I do want to show you guys the Typhoon market as well as part of the Tech 1 market, because it is of course a meta being flown by the Imperium in the war. It's often those guys are actually getting dunked from time to time, and as a result you get that same thing. We went as low as 150 million. They're currently being sold for 193 million ISK, and this one is actually managing to maintain that higher prices for several days on end, because there is this continued strong demand, because the war is still raging. They're still fighting in Hakonen, and yeah, the Imperium is apparently a little bit hell-bent on the Typhoon doctrine, so they replace those ships constantly. People do replace them on their own as well, probably coming to JITA, buying more Typhoons, keeping that demand up and running. So this is where the action is at the moment. Typhoon, Ferox, fleets that are being flown massively in the war. It's good time for those, but again, you also saw it in the let's quickly go back here in the Hurricane market, that once activity drops off a little bit, or once they switch to something else, the decline is very quick in the price as well. Let's move on to some Tech 2 ships at 3920. Here again, smaller Tech 2 ships I think are used in big fleets, interceptors, stealth bombers, so there we may spot some opportunities thanks to the war. Here is the Ares, right off the bat, went up in price substantially, currently being sold for 27.6 million. Buying those for 21 million has definitely been possible. 22 million maybe in the last few months, but that's a nice jump up, and this is of course what we've been waiting for when I was talking about looking for those buy opportunities in the Tech 2 market. These are the sell opportunities that I was talking about. Thanks to the war, a couple of days ago you could have sold them for like 30 million. Now it's still at 27 million, no problem. So let's say 5 million on a 22 million purchase, something like 15 to 20%, not so bad. Next up we've got the Claw. That one is very popular with the Imperium once again. I think it's the BRB, the big red boat, uses a lot of Claw fleets out there, and as a result you have this strong demand. They're still being sold for 41.9 million. Definitely the big winner. If during this period here you bought some for 20 million, this is your time to sell them, of course. So that is again the impact of Tech 2 on the war. Here is the Crow, also up in price, up to 30 million, being sold for 27 million at the moment. So this is the war yet again. The unfortunate part is that it's all in small ships, and as a result Morfight is just not moving, but at least it's something. Next up here we've got the Ares, also going up in price. Alright, so some interdictors probably being used and lost as well. We're out of interdictors, 53.7 million for the first seller. So if you have some of those cheap ones still from March, sure, bring them to the market right now, of course. It's a 1-year high, but the chart has never been too good for investing. The Flycatcher next, that one is well, above the average, so you can still try to sell them. Not as good a chart, of course, as the Claw, but maybe if you want to sell them, if you still happen to have a couple of really cheap ones lying around. Probably too late for that. Heretic, nice jump up here. That is good. I think the Heretic has been the best interdictor for the trading. You can see that on the chart. Quite a bit of movement. Nice dips down to 45 million ISK. And now actually Heretic being sold for 70 million ISK almost. Not bad at all. Buyers are at 52 million. So this one is apparently actively being flown quite a bit more than some of the others. Here's the Hound, next stealth bomber. First one, not bad, went up to 35 million, is on its way down of course, but still 29 million for something that you could have bought for 20 to 21 million without too much trouble. Very nice profit to make at the moment in these smaller Tech 2 ships. Even the Malediction is going up in price. The Malediction generally well oversupplied. You can see that on this price pattern here. Is breaking out here at the moment, went up to 31.3 million, not bad. I always hesitated, but here you know, 23 million, and you could have had buy orders at a really good price. I was saying maybe I don't like the pattern, but maybe this is the right time to buy some Maledictions. And you can see now this is the effect of the war. This is where you as a trader can make incredibly good deals on some of these. As always, I'll keep these new ones alive. Don't go crazy with the volumes, because if you're bringing hundreds of ships to the market, you are going to crash this down and you're gonna gut your own margins. But war is very good for business. Manticore next. Again, another one. Stealth bombers and interceptors definitely in the meta right now. 31.5 million for a Manticore. That's probably like 30% profit if you bought it for like 25 million. Now that's maybe a little bit much. 6 million on that. No, that's maybe, yeah, again, 15 to 20% is definitely possible on most of those trades. Not bad on the chart here again. Nemesis, a bit more timid. But did go up on a couple days for 30 million, currently being sold for 24.7 million, so not as good a margin. And the buyers in fact are, well, 22.5, there's a premium on those. Purifier next, also up in price, well above average, 30 million. Are we still commanding that? No, first one's coming in at 26.5 million, so we're a little bit late on this, but you could have sold Purifiers for 30 million, which makes you a nice little bit of risk if you bought them for close to 20. And finally we've got the Saber. I'm surprised that it's more Heretics than Saber action in the market, but Saber is currently being sold for 54 million and the buyers are at 50 million. So that's the Tech 2 market. Very good time to sell if you've made the right buys in interceptors and in stealth bombers. Next up we have the Tech 3 market. Whoever it is on Steam will have to wait a little bit. 44.15. Let's take a look at those. You may already have seen on the ticker that the Tengu did not have a good week, but the Confessor does. So that one is still being sold for a very nice 67.5 million. Can you imagine that just a couple of months ago we could have bought these for 30 million? That is 100% profit, just like that. 60 million and they'll probably be gone. So Confessor fleets also in the meta apparently, and definitely not bad at 60 million at the moment. The Hecate next, also up in price. Look at that, we're out of those. 75 million for a Hecate. And again, June, you could have bought these straight off the market by the dozens for 30 million. Next up here we get the Jackdaw. That's even worse. That's 103 million for a Jackdaw, 91 million for the buyers, 91 million for the buyers of Jackdaws. And in June we could have bought these by the dozen for 29.8 million. So this is the war, and it's apparently tactical destroyers that are the actual winners. It's not even the Typhoons, it's not the Ferox, it's the tactical destroyers. Here is the Jackdaw. 30 million buying, currently being sold for 100 million. That is 3 times the price, 200% profit, just like that. Crazy what the war can do here. And finally we have this Vapel, also up in price, but a little bit less still. 63 million, 64 million for this Vapel sellers. Yeah, it makes you want to have bought more, right? When everything was. I still have a small stock of, I think it's Hecates, that I'm going to obviously sell at this point. But this again should be our lesson. I think in the tech tree market, you need a lot of patience, because you can see here on that full year, that's very bad. These ships also got nerfs. You're very hesitant to build up stocks. And again, over the course of this year, you could have bought thousands of them if you wanted to at this very cheap price, and you're never gonna unload that many of them. But that small steady purchasing at those very low prices, when a war does break out, that's when you're making your profits. That's when you should have those ships ready for sale. I mean, just look at the Jackdaw. that even straight up to the buyers, you could have bought those for 30 million. You're selling them for 90 million to someone on a buy order. That's just crazy price at the moment. When it comes to the cruisers, those are not in the meta that much. I think the changes have basically pushed them out of General Nullsec doctrines a little bit, maybe to the great benefit of the destroyers, apparently so. Here the Legion, you can see some hesitation, but this is still basically recovering from the balancing that was done by CCP. So Legion is currently going for 157 million and the buyers are at 137. Definitely better than before the rebalancing, but not the massive war profiteering is not visible here. The Loki next, that one is doing quite a bit better, being sold for 221 million and the buyers at 200 billion. I think it basically means that the Loki has become the most interesting tech tree ship at the moment, for the cruisers at least, and that one is still commanding a very strong price. So the Loki, the big winner of the rebalance at the moment. The Proteus, definitely not, down to 124 million for the sellers, 115 million for the buyers. Very cheap to buy some Protei at the moment. And I think you can make a very strong drone ship out of the Proteus, but apparently nope, not that popular in the war at the moment. And finally we've got Tengu, which again you can see that hesitation, that market trying to find what's the Tengu actually now, what can it represent for the game. Sometimes yeah, people go up to 160 million. At the moment though, they're down to 146, buyers are at 136. So the approach is a big nope for everybody. Again, is this a buy opportunity? If you have the patience, maybe at some point someone is gonna field some Protei fleets, but it's just not the right one apparently, and the Loki is the big winner of the Tech Tree cruisers at the moment. But all the action, look at the Jackdaw, that's just the craziest chart that we've seen in a very long time. So thank you Imperium, thank you everyone that is fighting in Nullsec. It is definitely very good for EVE Talk and very good for some players out there that did have the smarts to purchase all of these ships for like 30 million. And here the big exercise, I keep saying it, but I think it's very important, is to A, have the patience, and B, don't go crazy with the numbers either. But if you do it right, then this is the time to sell a lot of your stocks in the Tech 3 and the Tech 2 ship market. And then finally for the extra product at 49.20, I'm going to take a quick look at the Pacifier and the Enforcer. I covered it on the stream as well, but I want to give everyone that watches Eve Talk a bit of a look at these as well. So these are of course very new ships, terrible chart to take a look at. We can see that they're down in price, but a Pacifier is still going for 197 million and the buyers are at 182 million. So still very, very expensive for a frigate, right? I think it is a frigate. If I press show info, yeah, it is a frigate. It is covered up, so it's not like it doesn't do anything, but it's still so unique and so rare that I would not be buying those for use. If you want one, you know, if you absolutely want one, then I do think that this is very reasonable price, 200 million for a unique ship. So from the collector's perspective, yeah, definitely I think you can buy it. For a usage perspective, nope. And for an investment perspective, that is tricky. I personally think that we'll want to wait until after EVE Vegas, so that the battleship comes out as well, and we are certain that everything that is meant to be given out to players has been given out. I think that's when we'll see the lower price, and then it's the same gamble I think as with the Gecko, whether or not CCP decides on providing different ways of getting the Pacifier in game or not. And then of course it could be a good investment regardless of the price. But I would personally, when it comes to these Concorde ships, if you absolutely want one, then of course, yeah, Pacifier for less than 200 million just to have it, sure, I can understand that. To buy them to use it, nope, you're gonna be a gank magnet right off the bat. And then to buy it as an investment, I would advise you to wait until after EVE Vegas. And let's also look at the Enforcer right here. So these are being sold for 881 million ISK, the first one. The price chart, you can see that pressure on the market at the moment, which I think is going to continue towards EVE Vegas. But after that, all bets are off on how to get them. Well, I think you can get them through Project Discovery as well, so they will have a bit of a price band that is regular, but these just look so good. It's less than $1 billion for a very unique ship at the moment, so I would give that exact same advice here. If you absolutely want one just to have it, just to be able to show it off maybe during a live event or a very unique situation, yes, buy it. If you're planning to use it actively, nope, don't do it just yet. And if you're looking for the investments, I would wait until after EVE Vegas for those. And I mean, they are incredibly good looking ships. I'm just going to buy one myself, I think, just to have it parked there in Jita, so that I can at least take him out on some special occasions. That's definitely something that I think I am going to do. It's $1 billion for both of them, basically a little bit more than that, which from the collector's perspective is definitely very doable. But for any other reasons, I would personally hold out a little bit on these ships, because they are of course still very expensive. I mean, this is practically $1 billion in a cruiser hull, couple of catalysts, if it's not too well tanked, can definitely get you on the undock. And then the frigate, it's even worse. I think at 200 million for a frigate, they ganked my 130 million shuttle just like that as well. So a 200 million frigate will definitely be a target as well. And that's it for these Concorde ships. They look so good that I do want them as well. I actually, in fact, nope, I'm going to retract what I said. I'm going to show the patience. I'm going to wait for EVE Vegas, and then I'll take a look at buying at least these two, and then see what the battleship is doing as well, to see if I wanna grab the full set there, depending on what those will be going for. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna not buy them now, although it would be doable. I'm gonna have the patience and wait for EVE Vegas until I make a move on these ships. That's going to be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.